Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Kristen Morse. I'm the director of the Center for New York City Affairs. We're a public policy research organization here at the New School. Today, we're going to take up the issue of low wages and the growing national movement to raise the minimum wage. Today, we'll ask our panel both, can we afford to give workers a significant pay increase, as well as if raising the minimum wage is enough if our real goal is to reduce hardship and to make New York City more affordable for working class residents. I'm pleased to introduce Derek Hamilton, our moderator. Derek is a professor here at the New School in Economics and Urban Policy. He's the chair of the doctoral program at Milano. His work focuses on education, the labor market, wealth, and racial inequality. I also want to welcome the panelists and hand it over to Derek to introduce our esteemed panel. A special thank you also to the staff of the center who organized this event and to all of you for joining us today. Welcome.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Glad you're here on this bright, early Monday morning. I know it's hard getting out on Mondays. It was hard for me, so I want to thank Kristen and the Center for New York City Affairs for always putting together important, timely panels dealing with issues that are important to leading to a more inclusive America. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel so we can get right into it. Their bios are long, but I'm going to give a brief bio so that we can get into the issues. I'll start with Jennifer Jones-Austin, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. She served as New York City's first Family Services Coordinator under Mayor Bloomberg, as Civil Rights Deputy Bureau Chief for Policy, Legislation, and Public Outreach for the then Attorney General Eliot Spitzer, and as co-chair of Mayor de Blasio's Transition Committee. And to her right, we have E.J. McMahon, Edmund McMahon, who is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and president of the Empire Center for Public Policy. He is a prolific writer on regional, state, local issues, and recommending policy changes, reforms to increase economic growth. Then we have Hector Figueroa, and he is the president of 32BJ, Service Employees International Union, which is the largest property service union in the country. It represents more than 145,000 property service workers in 11 states and Washington, D.C. Then we have Kathy Wild. She is the president and CEO of the nonprofit Partnership for New York City, the city's leading business organization. Its mission is to work with government, labor, and the civic sector to build a stronger New York with a focus on education, infrastructure, and the economy. And then last but certainly not least, we have Paul San, who is the General Counsel and Program Director at the National Employment Law Project, which is a research and advocacy organization working to expand economic opportunity for American workers. So today we're going to deal with some themes. The themes are, why is it that we've had stagnant real wages, yet currently, in the aftermath of the Great Recession, we have a downward trend in unemployment? What is the impact of wages, which are not evenly distributed by demographic group? We know that some people are more crowded into lower wages, based on gender, based on race, ethnicity, incarceration status, education, and their wages are more stagnant. Why? And is there anything we can do about this? And this obviously is all in the context of the minimum wage. We also know that the minimum wage is going to vary by state and localities. So, a question to think for our panelists to think about, are there any lessons learned by the fact that we have uneven minimum wages throughout the country in terms of its impact on both firms and workers? So let me get in with a general question that each panelist can answer, and that is, should the New York State minimum wage be increased? And let's start at the end.
So I almost feel as though that's a rhetorical question, right? Of course the minimum wage should be increased. As I was coming over here this morning, I, like probably many persons in this room, as you walk through the streets of New York City, you see evidence of people struggling to get by. I found myself in a Pret store a few days ago, and there was a young man, appeared to be a college student, and he was attempting to buy something, and he put forth the debit card, and then he put forth a credit card, and nothing worked. And I couldn't help but think to myself, does he know that? Does he not have money in the bank? Like, what's that all about, right? Now, I don't want to go on and on and on, but where I'm going with this is that we know that every day people are struggling to make ends meet. And we know that that number just continues to rise. And we know that it's because we live in a city where we have low wages. We know that low-wage jobs are the jobs that have increased since the Great Recession at a greater rate than other jobs. We also know that in a city where we have high rents and where we have people working without benefits, we've got to do something about it. When we've got, in this city, people who are working full-time jobs, 30% of the people living in poverty, working full-time jobs and not making enough to make ends meet. And then we've got a greater number of people who are just working, 64%, the working poor who are working, not making enough to make ends meet, struggling to put food on the table. We know we need to raise the wage.
EJ?
My initial answer to your question is that the minimum wage is going up. It's $7.25 federally. It's now $8.50 in the state, and is going to $9 at the end of the year. There is a wage board order for better or for, in my opinion, worse, that is going to make it in stages 15 for employees of national fast food chains, although that may be challenged in court any day now, I suppose. So I guess your question really in context is, should there be a higher statewide minimum wage than is already scheduled? And the proposal that's out there is, should it be $15? And the answer is no. And I think that, for reasons we can get into in our discussion, I think the reason is that, unfortunately, for all of the concern about the poorest and most marginal workers, I think that they are the workers who are most likely to be hurt by moving the wage up as high as the governor has proposed. And we can get into the reasons for that, but I think that it is not the simple all-purpose solution to people who struggle to get by, and that it will actually reduce job opportunities for people who are most vulnerable.
So we might as well lay out the reasons now, at least itemized. I'm sure there'll be responses from some of the panelists, so if you have them.
Well, I mean, there is a substantial body of research, not really outweighed by some other research within the past 20 years on both sides of this issue, but I think the preponderance of the research suggests what common sense would support, which is that when you significantly increase the cost of hiring people, that businesses will hire fewer people, that ultimately people are worth what they can produce, and that businesses, private employers, will not hire as many people if the cost of hiring them is raised significantly. Now, there's a lot of research on this. I think we can get mired in technicalities and dueling studies, but there has been quite a bit done on this. And I would say that the preponderance of the research is that it will result in a reduction in employment. Secondly, this is an order of magnitude beyond anything that's ever been done on a statewide level. There's never on the scale being proposed been a minimum wage increase as large as the one being proposed in New York. We're talking about a 67% minimum wage increase that would be phased in within a period of 3 years in New York City and within a period of 5 years in the rest of the state. That's extremely significant. We're venturing into undiscovered territory. And that's why many of the mainstream economists who advocate a higher federal minimum wage have refused to sign on to a $15 minimum wage. And I could quote a few of them if we want to get into it. Harry Holzer at Georgetown wrote a whole piece in Brookings over the summer saying that a $15 minimum wage could harm the poorest Americans. So I think that's the concern. I also think that it's oblivious to very, very significant differences in labor markets and economic conditions in different regions of the country and indeed in different regions of this state. We can get into that also. I don't want to
I just want to quickly jump in and say that, and I don't want to dominate this debate when we haven't even gotten to the other panelists, but there is a growing body of research, academic research, that suggests that that the impact may not be as great as some purport that it would be. That increasing the minimum wage may have little to no effect on the reduction of jobs. There is a growing debate about this, and the research suggests that you can look at it one way or the other.
So the gauntlet has been laid early. So, but we are going to have an ample amount of time to dissect some of these issues both ways. Hector?
Yeah. Our answer is very simple on this. We need to raise the minimum wage. And with all due respect to the argument that the minimum wage going up in the way that has been proposed by the wage board, or even raising it beyond what has been legislated, will result in the loss of jobs, is really... there is enough of an understanding in the research literature that a lot depends on what are the assumptions you make on how the economy works and how that wage increase is being analyzed and followed. And we don't need to get into the technicalities of it, although this is a new school, so you could probably go there in terms of the underlying economic theory behind it. But I think that the idea that somehow that's going to result in net job losses to low-wage workers is something that I would say there is enough challenging evidence to, at a minimum, cast it out on that. So we, as a union, are firmly on the ground of raising the minimum wage. We think the minimum wage in New York should go to $15 an hour. We think the minimum wage around the country should go to $15 an hour. We recognize that even $15 an hour, it is not sufficient to have as a wage under which to raise a family. In fact, our own members' experience, and we were talking with some members before the meeting, is that even with the union wages that 32 BJ members enjoy, which are well above $30 an hour when you include health insurance, contributions per hour, pension per hour, paid leave, training, legal, when you have the whole packet of benefits that they enjoy as union members, is actually below what many estimate to be the amount of money that you need in a city like New York to really make ends meet. And our own members will tell you from their own experience, and many other members, that what they continue to be glad that they have the union and have that compact, their spouses have to work, and sometimes they have to have jobs on the side to make ends meet. So from our perspective, a floor of $15 an hour that is being proposed to go up gradually, what it does is it restitutes a measure of justice to minimum wage workers who, if we were to adjust the minimum wage based on inflation, based on productivity gains, so I refute completely the notion that people are paid what they produce, they're not, will be $18 an hour nationally. So this is a modest beginning, and I think that the $15 an hour speaks to the fact that close to half of the labor force on an hourly wage compensation, leaving out benefits, is earning under $15 an hour, 64 million people. So it captured people's imagination, is doable, it's feasible, and it's not going to break the economy. On the contrary, we think it's going to strengthen our communities and the purchasing power of workers when they need it the most.
So the partnership members are mostly larger businesses that employ about 1 million New Yorkers. And we have historically supported increases in the state minimum wage, largely because of the inaction at the federal level to deal with the issue. We have supported them on a phased-in basis. We supported last year the governor's proposal to go to 13 in New York City. The current proposal is one that we have not endorsed because the question is it too much too soon, but we also haven't strongly objected to it. And the reason is because most of our members have a global footprint, a global business footprint, and they don't see this in the context of a New York State issue. They see the income inequality, the wage stagnation in a global setting, which requires a national response in the first place, but also requires considerations of what's happening globally and what America has to do to compete, to be able to have the wherewithal to bring wages up. And there's a general feeling that we are victims, in a sense, as a country, of the rise of the middle class in the developing world, that the pie, in terms of the economic pie, hasn't grown enough for the U.S. to keep pace over the last 40 years with what is happening in terms of where dramatic growth is taking place around the world. And so they're looking at the issue in a much more complex way. They would, again, like to see us be able to support the highest possible minimum wage because they want to be able to support the talent. And we remain, as Hector points out, a highly productive workforce in this country. But at the same time, they see the other issues, and I guess I would say it's disappointing that we aren't putting as much focus on closing the skills gap, on the education, career and technical education work, on some of the other issues we're going to have to deal with, on, for example, the trade agreements. From our standpoint, from the standpoint of our members, getting solid trade agreements that will increase output will in fact create jobs, create economic activity, and create the capacity to do much more on wage growth. So there are ways in which there are larger issues than the minimum wage that are global issues, that are national issues, and our failure to deal with them leaves states and cities grappling with issues that could put us out of sync with the ability to, I mean, it's much harder for a state or city to take on these issues than it is at the federal level. So that's generally our feeling. We understand the pressure for a minimum wage increase, and we generally agree with it, but we think that it is only one small piece, an oversimplification of a larger problem that's far more complex and that requires us to put our heads together in a whole different way.
Thanks. Thank you. So with wages flat or falling for the bulk of the American workforce, we're seeing a really historic national focus on income inequality and a push for the largest increases in the minimum wage that the U.S. has seen in decades. And we see this nationally, and I can map this out across the country, what's on the horizon, what we're seeing proposed in Congress. But New York is leading the way with the governor's proposal for a $15 minimum wage statewide, building on the $15 minimum wage for fast food that was approved this summer. This increase would deliver a very badly needed raise on the order of $4,000 to $5,000 a year for somewhere between 2 and 3 million working New Yorkers. A key thing to understand is this is a majority female workforce, very disproportionately Black and Latino, and the median age is 35. So these are not young workers in first jobs being affected. This is millions of workers across the state in all regions who have been stuck in low-paying jobs for years and have the prospect for the first time of seeing the first real wage gains in many, many years. Another key thing to understand is New York's taxpayers are picking up the tab for employers that pay very low wages. The estimates are that annual taxpayer costs from benefits for low-paid employees are on the order of $13 billion. Conversely, raising the minimum wage significantly will save the state budget significant revenue, particularly in the Medicaid area, where workers who are paid better wages will be shifted over onto Affordable Care Act expansion Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act exchanges, which saves state taxpayers and the state budget significant revenue. Some critics, EJ really is a leading kind of analyst on these issues from the right, have suggested that $15 is too high for New York. But if you look at the cost of living math, even in the low-cost upstate regions, if you look in Buffalo, if you look in Syracuse and Rochester, basic family budget calculators show that by 2021, even a single worker living at a very basic level will need $15 an hour just to rent an apartment, to cover transportation, to cover basic living costs, healthcare costs. That's in the lowest cost regions of the state. Downstate, the costs are much, much higher, and any workers supporting even one dependent need that much more. So there's definitely $15 is not excessive. And then there's the question whether even if it's what workers need, whether employers in the state economy can afford it. But if you look at the metrics by which minimum wages are sort of compared to economy-wide, $15 for New York by 2021 is really not an unreasonable wage. Even in the upstate regions, it would be approximately 62% of the median wage, which is at the level of a robust minimum wage, but actually not outside of the U.S. experience. Many of the U.S. states had 60% median wage minimum wages in the late 1970s, and in fact, in the late 60s, the lowest wage states had median wages of approximately 67% of the minimum wage. And there's no evidence that minimum wages at that level were economically harmful or disruptive. In terms of research on minimum wages, with respect, EJ's characterization of the literature really is exactly wrong. While there is still some debate among economists, there are very useful meta-studies that plot the findings of the bulk of minimum wage research over the past 20 years, and they have a bell curve in them. If I should have brought handouts that show the employment, that is the job loss effects that are found clustered just to the left of zero. That's the overwhelming weight of the evidence from past minimum wage increases. But you don't need to just look at research. If you look at what's happened in New York, where critics, I believe EJ's group among them, have predicted when the minimum wage has gone up in over the past 10 years that we would see job losses in New York, but they have not materialized. Cranes has reported that they have not materialized. It's clear, and many people believe that that's actually evidence that the minimum wage has been far too low for New York. A $15 minimum wage is affordable for New York's economy, and there's growing support among economists for it. A group of 200 economists signed a national letter backing a $15 national minimum wage. That includes economists from many New York State institutions. And other leading economic voices like Nobel laureate Paul Krugman have spoken in favor of Governor Cuomo's $15 proposal. So it really, New York, more than anywhere, needs a robust minimum wage on that level, and there's every hope that this can be delivered in Albany this year. Another key thing to note is that nationally, California is also moving towards a $15 minimum wage. It's very likely to appear on the 2016 ballot in that state and is currently polling in the high 60s, so it looks likely to pass. Thank you.
So we've heard what I think are opening statements. So for the rest of the panel, if you rest of the conversation, if you feel the need to jump in outside of queue, you're welcome to do so. I'll try to rein it in if it gets unruly, but obviously be respectful of each other and understand that many people have a lot of things to say. So let me go on to the next question. But first, let me point out. So EJ suggested that I might have asked the wrong question. That it might not be a question of should minimum wage rise, but the magnitude, and that seemed to have been a theme throughout the various panelists' question. Is it high? Is it too high? Is it too low? So maybe I'm incorrect in saying that maybe my interpretation that it's not a question of should it, but magnitude, but that's what it seemed like. So this way, let's go in reverse order and have the panelists respond to the question. Is there a threshold at which the minimum wage could become too high and lead to labor displacing issues? Or another way to think of it, is there a minimum wage that is in magnitude? At what level of minimum wage increase can we accept without having negative ramifications so severe in terms of employment? Let's start with you.
So, surely at some point a minimum wage could be too high to have significant disruptive effects economically, but for a high-cost, relatively high-wage state like New York, $15 by 2021 is not at that level. Again, it would be for the region outside of New York City, it would be just 62% of the median full-year worker wage.
Excuse me, Paul. I'm sorry. Okay. We're talking about hourly jobs, all hourly jobs, full and part-time. The median wage in much of upstate New York is less than $16 right now, okay? That's a fact. I mean, have any of you ever been to Binghamton? I mean, seriously.
Not the full-time, full-year worker wage, which is what economists use for comparisons.
But but the workers, the portion of the workforce that is going to be most affected by this, and the people, everybody, the group that everybody, the mob that everybody is evoking as the people who have to be helped by this, are people working in hourly wage jobs, often not full-time. And in terms of all jobs, okay, because we're talking about an economy that consists of all jobs, okay? The entry-level wage for hundreds of positions in upstate New York, as measured by the State Labor Department, is at or less than $15. The median wage for all jobs in most regions of upstate New York, in almost all of upstate New York outside the capital region, is less than 18, and in big swaths of upstate New York, it's between 15 and 16. And quite a few economists have acknowledged that, in fact, you can't treat all labor markets as the same. This would be extremely disruptive to those areas. And in fact, I find, and I'm somebody who's based in Albany, I'm around upstate a lot, this proposal has been greeted with something approaching stunned disbelief among many people in upstate New York. Because the debate here is all about, this city's really expensive, you know, we have to do something. And I'm not accepting the arguments for New York City offhand. But upstate New York is and vast regions of it are a very different place from here. And they are, in fact, substantially less expensive, living wage, et cetera, budgets aside. And this would be extremely disruptive and would, in fact, disrupt the labor markets to a degree never experienced before, difficult even to predict.
Paul?
But, you know,
Just,
okay.
just again, the full-time, full-year worker wage, which is what economists use to compare minimum wage rates historically and internationally.
No, some economists.
Well, you got to let him finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is roughly in June this year was roughly 2150 outside of New York City, and so is projected to be up above 22 by 2021. And again, actually, the data that emerged from the Labor Department's wage board hearings this summer was really instructive around fast food. It found that, median wages for fast food were actually much more similar upstate and downstate than than one would have thought. And actually, fast food jobs were growing more rapidly upstate. So in some ways, there's been a convergence both nationally and in the state's economy as it's drifted towards low-wage jobs. And no question about it, there are a lot of low-paying jobs. That's why we need a very, very significant minimum wage increase to lift workers statewide.
So, from what I see, I think that this is why economists are not going to settle the score on this one. Because, it depends on how you interpret the data and what do you think, based on the assumptions of how you think employers are going to respond, the economy works, that the same reality can be leading to different conclusions. We actually think that the majority of the workers in that labor market that Ija was referring before, yes, they are at less than $15 an hour or bordering $15 an hour, and that is why raising the minimum wage actually will be helpful to them. Because right now they're not able to live well, a decent life under those wage conditions. And we see our cities upstate depressed. We see them going into default. We see all the foreclosures that were experienced since the last crisis, and workers in this country are now in a pit much more deeply than it was before the 2009 recession. And if we are to wait for the next recession, for workers somehow, love on the, pat their face on the labor market and the free market, without intervention from the state or collective bargaining or any other artificial construct to hope for getting better wages, we're going to see far more poverty spreading and far more pain in the lives of working families in this country. I think that raising the minimum wage to 15 is the right thing to do. And what we need to be thinking about is how can we construct an economy where the amount of money that is actually needed for self-sufficiency can be attainable, because $15 an hour is not even the amount that will be needed for self-sufficiency. It will put us on the path of having gains for workers that haven't experienced them in a long time. But if what we are saying is we need to accept it, our economy cannot provide for anything less than poverty wages, then I will venture to argue that we need to fundamentally change the structure of our economy so that it can do that. We need to be on a high road path for really reinvigorating our economy, remaining competitive worldwide, not hanging in on beliefs that are actually not delivering for the majority of the people.
Let me add to that.
Let me go to Jennifer, and then I'm going to come to Kathy. But Jennifer, also in response to the question, if you could perhaps think about is there a role for the public sector in addressing some of these issues as well?
So FPWA is an anti-poverty policy and advocacy organization. We work here in the city with nearly 200 human service agencies that provide a variety of human services to individuals and families. And we also partner with various strategic partnerships with other advocates. We work with people at the state level as well. And what we repeatedly hear, and I'm just going to speak right now concerning those who are in the human services field, that social service workers, both in New York City and around the state, are not making $15 in goodly numbers. In New York City, we've got about 48% of our workers who are not making $15, and they look like their clients. At the state level, we've got better than half that are not making $15, many making less than $14, and they look like their clients. Yeah, we can get into. Let me just quickly say that America can do whatever it wants to do. Right, and we've seen that time and time again. We can solve problems. The question is whether or not we have the will to solve problems. And so this is as much an issue about what America can afford to do as much as it is about what America wants to do. And we know that in America, the people who are struggling most are disproportionately people of color. We know that they have had years and years and years of instability. And we can talk about skills-based training, but if we're not dealing with education from inception, if we're not dealing with the inextricable link between race and poverty, community, health, education, and income, then we can't just sit here and say that, okay, but when we get skills-based training in place, we'll be able to do something about this. We've got families that are struggling right now. And it doesn't seem to me that it is appropriate, the least bit legitimate, to sit here and argue about whether or not people should be paid wages that at least allow them to move towards self-sufficiency, where they can take care of their families. Why do we think that it's acceptable that we sit on this stage, we sit on this podium, not having to worry about whether or not, we are going to have to make ends meet, whether or not we're going to get enough SNAP benefits or we're going to get that housing subsidy because the wages just aren't enough? We can solve this problem if we so desire.
So let me give a quick follow-up. So EJ seems to make the claim that the private sector is not going to absorb the higher minimum wage costs, and it will ultimately lead to worker displacement. So my question is there a role of the public sector, ignoring the politic question of whether they can implement it politically or not, but what could the public sector do if that is a legitimate concern to address?
Well, the public sector has already been absorbing some of this, right? As you talked a few minutes ago, Paul, about how, already we're seeing that in New York State, to the tune of $13 billion, we're offsetting the private sector not doing what it should be doing. But right now, there's really no mandate to do more. So maybe we need to start thinking about how do we get the mandate in there and then build towards that.
I would just suggest, can I suggest that this is, let me point out again, $15 is a very large sum, even in an era of very slow economic growth and disinflationary tendencies in prices and wages, that whether you implement it now or in a few years. As of right now, it's at least 50% higher than the minimum wage has ever been on a productivity or inflation-adjusted basis, okay? At least 50%.
But really quick, I guess that the inflationary number depends on when you benchmark to. What year you benchmark.
Well, no, it doesn't actually depend on when you benchmark to. No matter where you benchmark it, if you normalize prices, the highest the minimum wage ever was, and you can actually look at it several different ways, and economists have done it. They've looked at it on a purchasing parity basis. They've looked at it on CPI. They've looked at it on deflator. It basically was $10.50 at its peak in the late 1960s, okay? When FDR started the minimum wage, it was in current terms $4 an hour, maybe $5, depending on how you measure that. No, nominally it was a quarter. So this is really big. This is almost an order of magnitude beyond where it's been. It is fully double the current minimum wage. There's a lot of history behind the minimum wage. It's so deep and so long. Paul and I were beginning an interesting discussion of it just over coffee before here. I'll point out one thing, and Thomas Sowell has pointed this out. You can look at the growth. The federal minimum wage was significantly increased and expanded at several intervals in the post-war era. And in fact, there aren't elaborate economic studies of this, but in fact, at the same time is when we saw an explosion of unemployment among black inner city youth, who did not have disproportionately large unemployment rates before that. Now, was that correlation causation? Not necessarily, but I think we need to ask questions about that. Again, this is big. I think we need to approach this with a certain amount of caution and humility, because if everybody is concerned about poor people and about people getting a leg up and getting started on the career ladder, do you really want to deny potentially hundreds of thousands of people after you do this over the space of 5 years a shot at their first job? Remember, the real minimum wage is not 15, it's not 10, it's not 9, it's not 7.25. The actual minimum wage is 0. 0 is the wage you make when you can't find a job. And again, there has also been a set policy that's been the product of bipartisan public and social policy over the last 40 years that almost without noticing, we're seeing a significant portion of people suddenly depart from and in fact deride implicitly in our discussion here, which is the earned income credit, which was invented under Democrats, expanded under Republicans and Democrats, expanded first in New York by Mario Cuomo and expanded further by George Pataki, which for a single person with a single child is $4,000 to $5,000 a year added to the wage before any other income support. Now it's being talked about strictly as a subsidy for the employer, that it's being turned on its head, and the planted assumption there is that we should just eliminate it and accomplish all wage support for low-income workers by simply mandating higher wage floors. But the logic of that argument is that the wage floor shouldn't be 15, it should be 30. That way we can all, as in Lake Wobegon, be above average, and all of us can complain about how hard it is to afford to live in New York City.
So EJ, the question though that I guess I led with for this round was, is there a minimum wage? What is the maximum minimum wage that we could have that would be reasonable and a good policy in your eyes?
I find reasonable the discussions over whether you should, and found reasonable to begin with the suggestion that you could have locally varying minimum wages, and the discussions that have been led by, and I can't pronounce the gentleman's first name, I'm sorry, Dubé is his last name, is an analyst. I believe many of you may be familiar with him, and other economists who are pushing for a $10 or $11 federal wage that gets to a point Paul Son made, which is that the minimum wage should be set at some multiple of the median wage, whether you measure it as median for all full-time jobs or median for total. And their suggestion was, and I think it's reasonable people can argue it. I'm not sure I'd completely embrace it still, but I think the reasonable assumption is that in high-wage, high-cost environments, you could have a higher minimum wage than you do in other places. His analysis suggested that in New York, you'd have a wage of about $11. If you extended his analysis, you'd have a minimum wage upstate that's lower than it is now. And there's been a lot written about this, and I would encourage you to look online by a lot of people. By no means, in fact, mostly not people associated with the right, however defined, about discussion about economists who have qualms about this, about who were out there doing a lot of work to make a case for locally variable $10 or $11 minimum wages, who are now being asked to sign a letter demanding a minimum wage of $15 and who don't agree with it.
Okay. Kathy?
You mentioned in your, did you want,
That's okay, right, Kathy.
if you want to finish up on that
No,
thought,
you
go
should.
ahead.
Go ahead.
We got Kathy and then Paul, and then we'll go Hector.
You mentioned in your opening remarks the irony of unemployment rates going down and yet the wage problem, and I think it's important to deal with that because I don't think that this conversation as an ideological debate or a moral suasion debate is the right way to go, because I think everybody agrees we have this problem in this country. And the question is, how do you put the pieces together that solve it? I don't think we're going to see a massive change in our basic economic capitalist structure. I think we have to assume we're going to be working within that, at least in my lifetime, maybe not in all of yours. And so I think that that's what we have to think about. So I think about things like on how high we should raise the minimum wage. What happens to the number of high school student interns we can place in jobs if, in fact, they're not exempted from the minimum wage, which is a complicated issue by itself. There's just a whole bunch of specific questions. What happens if you raise the minimum wage for the fast food industry and the and the food store across the street isn't subject to the same law. I mean, what kind of craziness does that result in? So I think that to have a thoughtful conversation, there are statistics on both sides on the economic stuff, but they're generally driven by ideology or morality, which are fine, but it's not going to help us solve the problem. Similarly with what you asked before, what the public sector can contribute here. Well, there are huge hemorrhaging of losses to employers from public sector impositions that sometimes make no sense at all. The process of getting permits and approvals. And I mean, there are lots of things that we could do in our society to be more efficient, more productive, more cost-effective if government was more amenable to reforms. So I would like to see us talk about the increase in the minimum wage as part of a package that we're thinking about what are the implications overall, and also just going back to the original issue about the unemployment rate. Our labor participation rate is terrible in this country compared to other productive competitors. In New York, we're about 63%, I think, labor participation rate in the city. In London, it's 10 points higher. They're in the 70s. Our city should look a lot like London when it comes to that dynamic. We do in other places. Labor participation rate, we're lousy. Part of that has to do with the low wage structure, high cost structure, but it is a larger problem that we ought to be talking about, not just the increase in the minimum wage, because you do that in isolation, it's not going to fix everything else. We have 100,000 vacant jobs in New York City right now, most of them paying many multiples of the minimum wage. 100,000 jobs in New York City today. You go online and read the ads. We are not preparing people for those jobs. We've got so many because it's become harder to bring people from foreign countries to fill those jobs. What is the obvious answer there? We ought to be solving for that problem. And it's not by further restricting immigration.
Kathy, let me just jump in on what you said real quickly. I agree with a lot of what you said, and I appreciate your thinking about how we need to move away from the ideological debate or the moral debate. I just want to restate that the inherent problem here is that we are coming at this issue with different beliefs and different values about what all Americans should have and how people should live. And so then, and it is based on how our society is structured. And so if you come at it with these varying beliefs, then you're further challenged in trying to get to the solution. And we're not going to solve that here. But that is at the core what this is about. When we can sit here and debate whether or not people should have basic needs, should be able to be self-sufficient and provide for themselves, because it gets all caught up in how our American economy.
I guess I disagree with you. I think the difference is about solutions, not about motives.
No, I do think that at the core that we do have a difference of opinion, and I'm not saying necessarily the people on this stage have a difference of opinion, but I do think that America does have a difference of opinion about how and who gets along. When we say that you should be paid based on your productivity, to suggest that people who are working and earning just $7.25 an hour are not productive or are less productive than the person who's making, $100,000 an hour. That's a judgment.
But who's saying that? I think
Ed said that a few minutes ago.
Let me jump in real quick. All right, so we have Paul is in the queue, and then I might shift gears a little bit.
Yeah, well, I also like to comment on the solutions, because I think we're missing the whole way in which the labor market functions in a free market economy. It's not about fundamentally changing capitalism and having something else. We could have that debate. It would be a very interesting debate to have among ourselves. But within the context of the economy that we have in this country, there are choices that we could make. We could choose to give workers more bargaining power. So they're not at the mercy of the employers. We could do that overnight. We can do that quickly. We could do that legally. And it will make a huge difference on what workers are earning today, because the decline in the minimum wage and the earning power of workers has been directly related to the decline of the labor movement and the ability of unions to function in this economy. And that has not happened accidentally or by natural law. It has been happening by a systematic attack on labor unions, and I experience that every single day. Two, we could also make education accessible. I agree with Kathy that education is key, but we need to make higher ed accessible again in this country for the vast majority of the people. Free access, free tuition. And the gains that we have from moving workers from minimum wage jobs to be able to earn more, from raising the minimum wage, you have a lot of money on the public treasury, $700 million, the governor estimated, went indirectly to McDonald's and the fast food chains in subsidies because these workers earn so little that they have to rely on food stamps and in social services. That money could go back to the public sector to increase the way that we take care of our elderly, to increase the way that we take care of those who cannot function, appropriately in our economy, who need help. And then last, affordable housing is critical. And we have lost the very idea in this city and in many parts of the country that you can have the way to afford rent and that you can have a decent place to live because it's way, way too expensive. We don't look at the policies in this direction. So there are very dramatic choices that fundamentally change the rules of the game under which we built our economy that still preserve the profit motive. I have not even set a maximum wage. I have not put a maximum profit rate, yet we are so keen and eager to talk about the maximum minimum wage. We need to be thinking differently, and I think that high road for our economy could be possible if we made those political choices. We're not making them because we are in an environment where the basic logic is that those kind of things will be seen as an attack on workers. But there are many other countries in the world that have higher minimum wages, have lower CEO worker pay ratios, and have a productive environment in which they are competing well in the world economy.
Right, so look, I got you. Hector brought up another issue, which is, what else can we be doing besides minimum wage, right? We have just to add some context, we know that income is a lot more volatile for workers, as well as when and how long they work. So we're in a place where not only are real wages stagnant, but we also have volatility with regards to when you're going to, how often you will work, and the amount that you're going to get paid. Can we do anything to address some of those issues?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. I mean, this sort of abusive just-in-time scheduling has been one of the newest strategies that HR departments have developed to try to microcalibrate their labor costs at huge human cost. I mean, this is especially prevalent in the retail sector, where a huge chunk of workers don't know their work schedules ahead of time. They may learn them as little as 24 or 48 hours in advance, which is just, when people learn about this, it's just insanity. It's, it makes it impossible to plan for childcare, to plan for school, to juggle a second job. Yet it's because our labor, despite low unemployment, there good stable jobs are in such short supply that many employers for a while were able to get away with this. There is now, though, an important new movement to push back. There are states and cities are starting to propose basic minimal standards to limit these practices. But even more gratifying, we're seeing major chains are starting to voluntarily drop these policies, and a number of them have just in the last 6 months. So it's the flip side of decent wages are stable, adequate hours, and there's an important policy reform movement moving ahead to tackle that problem. Just on a couple of the other points that came up. One, on the question of whether $15 minimum wage would have an adverse effect on youth of color in particular. The first thing to understand that the research shows that minimum wage effects on teen employment are small and very close to zero, and much less than the gains in earnings that teen workers and their families would gain from a much higher minimum wage. And what's really crucial here is to look right now where we are. New York's minimum wage is very low, just $8.75. Unemployment overall is very low, yet youth of color unemployment is sky high, and it's clearly not being driven by the minimum wage. It's driven by factors such as social isolation, the failing educational system, and the criminalization of poverty. But keeping the minimum wage low is not going to help youth of color or young workers at all. And in fact, African Americans and Latinos are disproportionately, the huge beneficiaries of a much higher minimum wage. on a couple of other points, the earned income tax credit is a really important policy, and I think progressives would point out the costs that major low-wage employers are imposing on the taxpayers are not by any means criticizing the EITC. It's in New York and nationally, it's been progressives who have pushed for its expansion and are continuing to do so. But if you look at what the cost would be to deliver a comparable raise to New York's workers through an EITC expansion, you realize that it cannot do it alone. If we assume that, say, 2 million workers will get a $4,000 annual increase from Governor Cuomo's $15 minimum wage, that would cost $8 billion to deliver that same increase through an expanded taxpayer-paid EITC. That is not remotely politically feasible in Albany or really any state. And it just highlights we need a much higher minimum wage plus expansion of the EITC and other basic supports, free public higher education, and other key reforms to create opportunity for the middle and working class.
So who's paying the $8 billion in the increase in the minimum wage?
Well, so when the minimum wage goes up, there really are three factors.
Well, you said
yes.
it's an $8 billion cost.
No, exactly. I think it's basically when the minimum wage goes up, the costs are absorbed through three channels chiefly. There are some efficiency savings from reduced turnover, there's some trim profit margins, and much of the rest goes into prices. And so, and that sometimes raises the question: is that counterproductive? Is that regressive? But in fact, it's just the opposite. The impact on prices are very modest price increases by retailers and restaurants and other low-wage employers are paid disproportionately by middle and higher income consumers, whereas the benefits are very disproportionately concentrated among low and working class workers. So that is probably half or more of the cost is passed on in that fashion, and it actually is good policy and progressive. The last thing that's been raised is the role of the private sector, and public sector rather. And I thought perhaps maybe some of the suggestion in Professor Hamilton's question was that maybe there would be a need for tax breaks of some sort for employers. And I actually believe there may be common ground between EJ and some of us in saying that is not where public. I know EJ has criticized past tax breaks that Albany has manufactured when they've raised the minimum wage. I think the real priority for public sector investment should be on the human services sector. It really is a largely state, publicly financed sector. It's been underinvested in for far too long, and so part of the formula for transitioning the state to a $15 minimum wage has to be increased investment in human services costs. And fortunately, there is savings from the higher minimum wage to Medicaid, as noted, as workers shift onto federally funded ACA exchanges and expansion Medicaid, and we need to take that revenue and more and invest it in the human services jobs that pay far too little.
Have you looked at Medicaid numbers for New York State? The vast majority, like EJ will know, 80% of our Medicaid dollar is going to people in the last 18 months of life. That is not the low-wage worker population. So I can't imagine that there's any...
Yeah, I'm not sure where the Medicaid numbers that you're talking about, I think they're a little inflated. I think if I could comment on the earned income credit, the reason the number you're citing, and I think I've heard the governor use that number, is so large is because the governor, like you, is treating the entire mass of people who would be affected by a higher minimum wage, or particularly a $15 minimum wage, as just this homogeneous mass of self-supporting adults who have dependents. But that's not the case, and you know it. Most people there are a large group of people, but not a majority of people who get the minimum wage, who are poor, who are supporting someone and themselves, and who are the sole support of themselves and that person they're supporting. There's also a large number of people. Net of those people who would no longer have a job or would not have an employment opportunity, there's a huge mass of people who are the second or third income in a household that's well above the poverty level, 2 or 3 times the poverty level. There are teenagers and students working in part-time jobs while going to school. Now, if we agree, if we say, hey, look, we've got a crisis, and we need to turn all of our attention to addressing the crisis of low-wage workers. And by the way, I'm sorry, but I reject the implication that somehow one has a different moral standard or values simply by recognizing that there are differences in labor productivity, which is basically an underpinning of economics. But I would say that if you're going to say that is a priority, There's a far more efficient way to address that priority. You can far more efficiently and a far more cost-effective basis address it through programs like the EIC, which would not only involve expanding the amount of money that's spent on the EIC, which is in New York State fairly significant. It's about $1 billion now. I support it. I think we ought to think of ways to expand it in response to these concerns, for instance, by adding single individuals to it, that it would be much less and increasing the EIC for married couples, which is also shortchanges married couples. But let me give you an example. A single person at a $9 an hour minimum wage, their wage income alone would be a little over $18,000. Their income with EIC and child credit will be about $22,500 in New York State. That's not counting, food stamps or other non-cash benefits. Because these programs have high marginal tax rates and phase-out ranges, the person who keeps a job and gets a raise to $15 an hour from $9 will keep just over half of that cash. The rest of it will go back into the government. So employers will be paying 100% of a big increase in the minimum wage. But the people you're talking about, the focus of your concern, which is not teenage part-timers or a spouse working, to bolster the family income of another spouse who makes more, those people will not actually get 100% of that because of the different way those programs are run. So I think that in recognizing this issue and saying this has got to be a priority, we have to do more for low-income working New Yorkers. First of all, you need to recognize and understand what we're doing already, then discuss what's not sufficient about that. The EIC has been, by the way, whenever I look at the EIC, I'm shocked at how little scholarly research and practical analysis has been done of how to improve it, because the big downside, the EIC is quite significant just on its own, but you get it once. You have to go to a tax preparer earlier in the year, file a return, and then get your check. There have been some studies made of how that works, and hundreds of thousands of people get it, but I think we ought to be thinking harder about different ways of transmitting the EIC to the worker on a more regular basis, in addition to possibly making it more generous. But I think we ought to be talking about that. And I would leave you with this thought, again, and I think prudent economists, a lot of them, who are not against raising the national minimum wage quite significantly with regional variations, just consider this. If you're willing to entertain the thought that it's possible that a lot of jobs will not be created and that a lot of jobs will in fact be eliminated, if you do this, if you're willing to actually consider that possibility, you have to consider how big a trade-off you're willing to make. I think that's a significant thing. You can't.
If I can just jump in here real quickly, FPWA.
Also, I wanted to jump in real quick on my clarification, then I'm coming to you, I promise, Jennifer. Just clarification on what I was trying to allude to with the public sector question. As EJ pointed out, the true minimum wage is zero. I was actually talking about being a direct creator of a job, actually hiring. I think that's an efficient form. There's some benefit to a job itself, and can the public sector increase employment? We have historical precedent of large increases in public sector employment with good jobs that pay well. Is there a role for that? Jennifer.
So FPWA conducted, in partnership with the UJA Federation and Catholic Charities of New York, a study. We commissioned the Urban Institute to take a look at poverty and anti-poverty policies at play here in New York City, and a few that have yet to be implemented, like an adult EITC. And one of the things that we appreciated from looking at this is that just raising the minimum wage alone to $15 could result in as much as $3 billion in government savings due to increased tax liabilities and a reduction in government spending on supports. What we did was we asked the question, if you raise the ITC, you raise the minimum wage, if the government provided child care to all who are eligible, we're talking about low-income people, if the government provided housing subsidies for people who are on Section 8 housing, if we created a senior and disability tax credit, if we took a look at policies that are either in place or that could be in place to reduce poverty here in New York City, seeing that
I didn't get that.
She said repeat.
She doesn't get it, right?
Listen.
What we saw was that if government really made an investment and invested in the right policies. Again, everything from increasing the minimum wage, guaranteed child care subsidy, EITC, housing subsidy, let's see what else, transitional jobs being a big factor in addressing the needs of youth who are hard to employ, people who've been formerly imprisoned, and people who've been unemployed or underemployed for an extended period of time. If we made these investments, yes, it is significant, a significant investment, but you could reduce poverty over time and get people on the right path. Again, it comes down to where's the will and what you want to do.
And from our perspective, the whole transfer payment and using taxation as a vehicle to alleviate poverty, we support that, and I think there are creative ways to do it. But I want to return to the whole question of ultimately the role of government should be much more than that. Government should also restore a measure of balance of bargaining power on workers. And we cannot dance around that issue, because if workers are unable, out of their disadvantaged position, to negotiate for themselves a better wage, all we're going to be doing is really dancing around the problem. We're having an economy that is being rapidly transformed into a gig economy, into an economy where 30% of the people are working contingent, casual work. Some of them may want to move from employer to employer, be independent contractors, but many are forced to have 2-3 jobs because there is the ability on the employer side to have them work that way. And I think that we need to pay attention to this other element, because it's not simply the distribution of income through government, but it's also what we can do to restore decades of erosion on the ability of workers to bargain for themselves. We are discussing the minimum wage, and I would say that, very, very candidly, as a vehicle to improve workers, because, the number of unions, the percentage of unions in this economy has declined significantly. We need to rebuild the power of labor unions. Maybe not everybody on this panel will agree. I think there are people in industry who actually agree with that notion. It's not possible to separate the two. This is why the movement for the 5 for 15 has been so deeply ingrained in some of the unions that recognize that if we are to influence on what the conditions of workers are, we have to really, be in a path to restore decades of erosion on the setting of wages through collective bargaining. And I think that to me is a fundamental principle. And if we don't accept that principle, then we're basically not recognizing how wages are determined. In our industry, we have seen wages go up in security from minimum wage to better paying jobs without the loss of employment. Janitorial cleaning has seen increases. We're trying now to increase fast food workers through all these measures, and also pursuing the union. One issue again that I want to bring about of public policy is that it's in our interest to solve poverty, to restore bargaining power.
I think it's important to point out that, and I think Hector would agree, that this is a problem that is the anti-union sentiment is not nearly so much a New York phenomenon as a phenomenon in other parts of the country. In New York, 26% of our workforce is unionized, as compared in the country average is what, 6% or something like that?
Yeah.
So I'm with you. Most employers that I know would far rather resolve these issues through collective bargaining than have the government, particularly the city council, come out with their solutions. So it's important to remember that New York and California are something of anomalies in many respects, and that the problems that we have are much more generated around the country. What we worry about is if New York is very aggressive about pursuing social policies that put us at a competitive disadvantage for attracting employers, attracting business investment, attracting jobs. That's an issue. That's why I think both and from what Hector said in terms of the concerns about affordable housing, issues of transit fares, there's a whole bunch of issues that belong in the conversation with as much passion and organizing interest as the increase in the minimum wage. It's a much bigger set of problems.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to shift gears slightly, but if you can obviously answer whatever you want in the response and go back to things we talked about before. But the issue of race has come up The issue of skills have come up. So I just want to add a little bit of context. We know that if you're a recent black graduate, you have an unemployment rate. If you're a recent black graduate from college, the unemployment rate you face is about 10%. Even with a STEM major, it's about 12%. We know the underemployment rate for that group is about 30%. We know that at every level of education, wage gaps are the typical black might have about 7 cents on the dollar as a typical white. We're not even talking about wealth gaps, but just the income gap. We know that unemployment is about twice as high for blacks as it is whites at every level of education. Indeed, if you are a black recent community college graduate, you have higher unemployment rates, slightly higher unemployment rates, than if you are a white high school dropout. So how do we is there lessons to learn about skills as being the driver from some of that data? And is there any information we can gather about discrimination, let's say the word, that still exists in labor markets that lead to some of these results?
You know, there's some great examples of programs that totally resolve that issue, but they've never scaled. SEO, which is a program, a nonprofit organization that takes black and Latino kids from 9th grade through college, and it's been focused historically on the financial services industry. You meet a black Wall Street banker, he probably came from New York, he probably came through the SEO program. Internships in the summers, a Saturday school, total support all the way through. There are examples like that, but if you look at most New York City high schools, we just did a survey last year with the Department of Education on the career and technical education programs. 40% of high school kids are in career and technical education programs. Less than 2% of them have any kind of work experience internship, any exposure to the real workplace. And the result of that is that the kind of, we've got to figure out how to scale this stuff up. We found that there are 315 programs in different schools in the city, 51 dedicated CTE schools. The balance are programs in the schools right now operating. There are only 330 employers participating in those CTE programs. So they're not even connected to the workplace. We know how to fix this stuff. There are plenty of anecdotal examples, organizations, a number of organizations like SEO that have solutions. We're not investing in them, we're not scaling with them, and that is a direct, if you go to a school in Westchester, those kids are going to be exposed to the workplace, through family, through community, through friends. The kids that are isolated from the innovation economy in particular don't have a chance unless we build those programs.
But the contradiction is the data suggests that even when blacks are able to attain skills, they still face huge barriers in the labor force, sometimes even more than comparably less skilled whites.
A degree, I'm sorry, I know you're an academic, but an academic degree does not translate into workplace skills automatically. Experience in the workplace is absolutely necessary.
Even an engineering degree?
Even an engineering degree. I was talking the other day to some tech hirers and they say we can't find any XYZ in the city. It's people, our economy has become so highly specialized. You have to work with employers in a much more robust way than we're doing now. And that's going to be our top priority for this year's legislative session, and I hope it will be that of organized labor as well. The UFT, it's going to be their top priority.
You want to get into it?
If I can just interject,
Okay.
so I'm the one sitting on the end who's the lawyer with who plays the social worker sometime, and so my response to your question is not going to be replete with data points, but I just want to speak for a little bit about Kathy's right. SEO is a fantastic program, and there are other like programs. There are programs for students like PrEP and the Oliver program that work with kids of color who have demonstrated an ability to excel academically, and they help support them and create posse-like environments where they can, be a support to each other and move through high school and then on to college and to graduate school. a lot of the work in this country has not focused on the issues within the community. And how do you not just kind of work on one child at a time, but how do you work on strengthening communities? We know that there's a high correlation between education outcomes and health outcomes and income outcomes tied to community outcomes. And until we invest in communities and not just individuals and one-offs, we're not going to crack this issue. The other thing that I've observed through the years in various roles in government and in the nonprofit sector and even in the private sector is that we don't continue to make the investments in people who have been marginalized, who've been kept out of the game, if you will. I remember well in my years in city government that often the commissioner of color who was having a challenge was a problem. But the commissioner who was not of color, who was supported with a cabinet, with a private group of people who would nurture that person to deal with some of the challenges that were manifesting in his or her agency. And so this is not a response, again, that is replete with data, but I can give you anecdotal evidence time and time again that this is a continuing problem that cannot just be solved with programs that help a few here and there. It's at the core. We've got a system, and I know that people don't want to hear this, but we've got a system that continues to marginalize and invest in some and not others. And then we have these policies time and time and time again where we say we're trying to fight poverty, we're trying to fight racism. Why isn't it working? Because we're really not making a concerted effort.
Hector, and then
I think that, again, those kind of programs are very helpful and we need to promote them, but you also need to have the parents of our children, particularly in communities of colors and poor communities, being able to be home there for the children and in concert with our institutions so they have a helping hand. And when they're working 2, 3 jobs in order just to pay ends meet, it makes it very, very difficult. That child is already starting with an enormous disadvantage because the parents are really scrambling to make ends meet. And there was an economist a long time ago that now is credited for mostly his analysis of financial instability, Hyman Minsky, but he also wrote during the Lyndon B. Johnson Greater Society years about the question of fighting poverty and the need not simply to focus on putting income on people who are poor, but also in creating conditions so their working ability, the ability to earn income at the point of work could be improved. And I, again, want to say that we need to return to that idea in tandem with other ideas, because when parents are able to provide for their families, when they have fixed schedules, when they have, decent earnings, we have a better condition at home under which, they can provide for their families. But if the rent is going too high, if apartment buildings are impossible to be afforded, and people are in crowded apartments and parents not present, no matter how much money we throw to an educational system, we are not going to make the progress that we could make otherwise.
Hector, let me just add to that, for several years I worked in the city's Child Welfare Administration as a Deputy Commissioner for Policy and Planning. And one of the things that we began to understand more and more and more is that we were engaging a lot in foster care as an intervention service and not doing enough by way of prevention. And what we saw was that the household of a child who comes into foster care looks very different than my household, than possibly your household. Very often what you see are parents with low wages or no wages. You see a lot of the social ills that have beset children and families growing up in poverty, intergenerational poverty, in communities that have been abandoned. And so, I completely agree with the points that you're making, and I would just add that this work takes looking at individuals and families on the whole and communities.
Yeah, no, I totally.
May I startle you by agreeing with what was just said?
I guess you get
You might call it our own Minsky moment, if you will. Yes, you have to address the conditions in which people live and their capabilities. And to get at your question, it's not the field I'm in that much, but I do think that the statistics you cite, I've heard, they're startling, and they should be a source of great concern. They're disturbing, and I think that they have something to do with skills training and education issues that we've heard discussed here, and other issues. there's one thing I want to get to before you're done, because it's been alluded to several times and it's permeated this discussion of higher minimum wage. There's many planted assumptions which I think are wrong or partly or fully unfounded in this debate. One of them is that all of the employers we're talking about who have minimum wage jobs are big, fat, nationally, if not globally profitable national chains. The debate is confined to, and it began talking totally about fast food, as exemplified by McDonald's, the Big M, the big arches, that all of the talk is about how big profitable businesses are being subsidized even by the earned income credit, and they could afford to pay more, and they should, and by gosh, we're going to make them. Now, and as Kathy has pointed out, Kathy represents larger employers, many of them global corporations, that are not, to whom the minimum wage is in fact not that relevant. All right? Now, let me point out, most of the people employed in New York are employed by small firms, that while some of those small firms are outlets of national firms, most of them are not. I would like you to picture a different set of employers than the ones you've been picturing, which are small and independent businesses, by no means all of them involved in the restaurant or fast food business or even retail. Small family-owned businesses all over the state, including near here, that are in no way, that are less able to absorb this in many cases, that have thinner profit margins, that are less capable of absorbing what I would say would be a shock to their system from this higher wage than global firms. Now, I think many people support this, and what you're kind of thinking is, I'll show McDonald's, I'll make them pay more. I've seen the research, they can afford it, okay? Let me suggest something to you. That if this policy goes through in 5 years, the only place in upstate New York where you'll be able to buy a pizza will be Domino's, unless it's Pizza Hut, because they have the marketing might and the capital to absorb this. You're actually going to favor the big, the global, the national, the people with massive marketing budgets, which if you were watching the World Series or football over the weekend, you're always reminded. How many of those commercials were for big national fast food chains? But that's not 100% of the employers we're talking about, nor is fast food 100% of the business that's involved in paying. Many upstate employers, including manufacturers, some of which I could name to you if I had their permission, that pay training wages, not an official government set training wage, but the wage they will pay a worker to invest a year or two in training them, somebody who's just out of high school or community college, in how to do what they need them to do, is less than $15. And they will hire fewer people and they'll be less competitive. One other point about big companies. When you get in your mind, start thinking about these big little companies issues. Walmart, as a PR move as much as anything, recently made a big show of saying, we're going to raise the wages for all our workers. You may have read about this because they've been compared unfavorably to Target. So they did this. Guess what's happening downstream of Walmart's? Walmart's, which is already famous for squeezing its suppliers until the pips scream, as they say, is squeezing even harder. What Walmart is doing is passing its higher wage costs down to its suppliers, which are many thousands of small companies, by no means all of which are in Asia. And they are having to eat cuts in what Walmart will pay them for what they sell Walmart. These things always have an effect, one way or the other. And you're actually going to give rise to and promote the development of an economy that is even more dominated by the big, the global, the people who have muscle and big marketing budgets at the expense of the small, the local, the community-based. I would just point that out to you because that's definitely, I think, one of the unintended consequences of this. And I'm not sure everybody who favors a higher minimum wage actually wants to see that happen.
So we have about a half hour left. And here are the things I want to do in the last half hour. I want to pose to the group, are there lessons learned about some of these displacement effects, some of these impacts on non-large corporations from the variation we have in the country of municipalities with higher minimum wages compared to other municipalities with lower minimum wage? So in other words, did we see these transitions take place in localities like Seattle, where minimum wages are relatively higher? I also want Paul to get a chance to respond to everything that's been said, as well as the question about racial implications. And then lastly, I want to open it up to the audience so that you all can partake and probably have some brilliant things to ask.
So, thank you. Yeah, on the small business point, you're exactly right. We have a lot of evidence. We're not. We don't have to guess in a vacuum what the impact will be of significantly higher minimum wages, because we have a number of U.S. Jurisdictions that have been phasing them in for a number of years, and so Seattle is one of them. And it was predicted there, as it often is by opponents when a minimum wage increase is proposed, that it would devastate the restaurant industry. But the front page story last week from the Cranes business of Seattle, which is the Puget Sound Business Journal, was titled "Apocalypse Not," and it was describing the restaurant boom that the city is continuing to see. With it's on target for a record number of business licenses this year, kind of continuing a recent year trend. I mean, the research. I don't. There's a bunch of research on the higher wage cities. We've San Francisco, San Jose, and others. I don't think there's no evidence of a change in small versus large employer business mix. And the simple reason is most of the low-wage employers are service industry employers that compete in their local economies, and all of their competitors are everyone's on the same playing field. And so labor costs go up for everyone. It's absorbed through, there's some price adjustments, some trim profit margins, some efficiency savings, but there's no evidence that it's changed skewed the mix towards large employers. And the data in the aggregate is that there's in those high wage cities, there's no evidence of reduction of employment or slowed business growth. Sometimes from time to time individual businesses will close, and the restaurants are a very high churn, high failure rate industry, so that's going to happen in any city. But if you look at the aggregate employment levels, job growth numbers, there's no evidence of that it's hurting employment.
Audience, unless somebody wants to respond, audience, it's your time. Okay, first question.
Hi, I'm curious about labor force participation among mothers of small children, and whether one of the reasons that the labor force participation is so low is that the child care costs are so high. And is there anything that government can do about that? The other reason, of course, is that if you raise the child care workers' wages, it makes it even more expensive for mothers to work. Not saying they don't deserve the money, but I'm curious about whether the labor force participation is affected by the fact that child care costs are so high.
I would assume that would be one of the factors.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, but for certain populations more than others, right? So people who are in poverty, low-income people who are receiving public assistance have to commit to, seeking work, working, or seeking work, and so they are affected. But there are, it's not everybody who can stay at home just because they have child care issues and receive public assistance. On the point about raising the wages of child care workers and how that might affect the workforce and just the issue. Government, child care workers under contract with government to provide child care services essentially are an extension of the government workforce. And it is not at all legitimate or justifiable to say that, we can't raise the wages of child care workers who are working, putting in a full day's work, are being productive, and are working as hard as government employees, government, direct child care, or UPK, if you will, as an example. So there's a difference in salary for the community-based UPK providers than there is for the DOE workers. Are they doing different work? Are they putting in different hours? In fact, those in the community-based organizations are putting in more hours. We can't say that we will not raise the wages for them because we're concerned about the impact of that on, jobs and on labor participation. They deserve to be paid a fair and commensurate and comparable salary.
Speak into the mic.
I agree with you. I was thinking more of the child care workers in the private sector.
And also, can you clarify what UPK is?
The Universal Pre-Kindergarten. Many of the child care workers in the private sector are receiving government contracts. So it's not just that they're out there, or sometimes they're getting vouchers that are paid for by the government.
And if they're not, they should. And one of the things about raising wages, for minimum wage workers and taking them out of public assistance, is that those dollars could go to pay home care workers, daycare workers, better wages, and supplement, in the case of EJ, those small businesses and venues that require, a helping hand in that kind of an adjustment, especially in the nonprofit sector. So, I mean, it's a very important issue that, again, we need to think about what is the role of government. And I think the role of government should also be able to provide for ways for those workers to earn a decent living.
Just one, but you're absolutely right that quality, affordable childcare is a huge crisis for working people, and it needs to be a more deeply subsidized public good. That's part of why the universal pre-K movement is so significant, to take one more year of childcare costs off of families' budgets, but we really need to do a lot more. And I think we're now starting to see more proposals being floated nationally. I think Secretary Clinton has one as part of her platform, but we need to treat childcare as a public good and subsidize it in the way we do K through 12 education.
I think we had a question over here. If we could bring the mic. Would it be easier if we had the people line up? Or do you want to bring them the mic?
I'll bring them the mic.
Bring them the mic, okay.
Thank you. I'm one of the minorities that is doing very well because I had a defined benefit plan that has all but disappeared from companies today. I know we're not talking about the small companies. So I worked for a big company. So I was fortunate. I have a defined benefit, I have Medicare, I have a supplemental, and I have Social Security. So I'm doing very well, and I'm glad I'm doing very well. But I look at my children today, and they are under severe pressure, and they all have had higher education. I remember back in the 80s when I was fired from my job, and I was out of work for 11 months, and I have 4 children. The only thing that saved me was my mother had a 4-room apartment, and she took us in for 6 of those 11 months, and then I got another job after the 11 months. But my point in saying that is that the president of the company also lost his job. He was fired from the company. But he was given an office, a private secretary, to find work for him in his next job by the company that he was fired from. So this obscenity of the haves and the have-nots in terms of top management and the working poor is just obscene. And I'm wondering, we didn't get any solutions today, but the panel was all over the place, and I appreciate all of your inputs. It was very thought-stimulating. Thank you.
So the question of distributions as well as private versus public risk on workers, that seemed to be coming up in the theme. Can the panelists respond to that?
Well, can I just point out, I guess I can sort of get at that at one about, since we're going to ultimately, somebody will say the magic word inequality, which then leads to talk about wealth. And actually to respond to something Paul said about Seattle, you were referring to the experience in Seattle. 2 things. It's a little early to reach a positive conclusion yet on how the Seattle thing has worked out. Secondly, Seattle is one of those islands. Seattle is a place that is doing extraordinary, it's booming. It's producing a bumper crop of very high wage jobs in a place that's a relative economic island. Silicon Valley is very similar. And all the orthodox, economics would suggest to us that that is an environment in which you're going to produce a lot of service jobs. Of course, what you're not reasoning from is the alternative, which would be how many more service jobs we reproduced if Seattle, in the same circumstance, hadn't raised its minimum wage. But I'm surprised you didn't use an example I've seen you use in other cases, maybe because it's not as good, which would be Santa Fe. Santa Fe, New Mexico raised its minimum wage very, very dramatically about a decade ago. I'd invite you all to go online to the BLS or other services and look at Santa Fe's economic performance, even relative to the lousy economic performance of New Mexico in general. It's terrible, and Santa Fe has a very high youth unemployment rate, did before that, has had it since then, nothing changed. Santa Fe has a lot of problems that have not been fixed by having a higher minimum wage, I would argue. Now, there's been 2 competing sets of studies done on that, too. But the issues that can be brought into here that inevitably will come in, CEO pay is a ratio to the lowest paid employee's pay, defined benefit pensions versus defined contribution, all of that stuff, which is a big, broader array of things. Again, I'm coming here talking about the minimum wage issue in particular. I think the first question we have to ask ourselves is, will this hurt more people than it harms? I mean, than it helps. Is there a risk of that? If you say there's no risk at all, it's not going to eliminate a single job, then I would say, why are you stopping at 15, favor 30? If you're saying, well, it'll probably affect employment to some degree, but I'm willing to accept that. Okay, how many jobs will be lost? And would you care to talk to the people who will no longer have employment, and what should we do for them? So, that's what I'm focusing on, and I just think, in fact, we do have share fundamental values. And the fundamental value is that everybody should have the opportunity to have work with dignity and to advance as far as their skills and energy will take them. And those who can't, who will always be with us, need to have good social and governmental safety net programs to help them and to prevent them from falling further. I think we all agree on that. The question is, are we going to do a lot of harm from this? And I would say the answer is yes. I'm just urging you to consider that possibility. I'm not saying I don't expect to change minds, but consult your own common sense and your own thought on what a 67% increase in the minimum wage will do, and try really hard to convince yourself, once you remind yourself that not all employers are multinational, highly profitable, multi-billion-dollar multinational companies, and ask yourself whether you really think that absolutely nobody will have their hiring patterns or even their existence affected by this.
So just to give some context, we got a lot of questions.
Right.
We're going to have a lot of comments. We only have 20 minutes left.
Okay, sorry.
I want to leave you all with a 2-minute final statement.
Okay.
And just to reiterate, the question was really about risk shifting in our society. Risk shifting where the public sector insured us against risk in old age and things like that, to now a structure in a society where it's more burdensome on individuals to ensure their well-being. So can we address that question as well as anything else?
So if I may, I would say that, that is exactly the trend that we're in. And, from our position, that is very wrong. And the way to counter that is really to empower people to be able not to face the same level of risk. Individual workers have much less power than workers who have collective rights. And it's very interesting how conventional wisdom will accept that people should do as much money as their skill level allows, or as much as the capital that they have and possess as an endowment allows, but not about the ability of them coming together as a group and bargaining conditions and wages. And that it's still a not accepted notion. Kathy said very well that in New York it's more accepted than in most parts of the country. But one way that you minimize risk is by spreading that level of risk among a group of people. And when you are facing with the ability to bargain collectively, you're minimizing more of the risk that you will be facing as an individual worker. Now, that doesn't answer all the problems, just like the minimum wage going up doesn't answer all the problems of our cities. But I really think that we need to take a look at how are we protecting and expanding the ability of workers to come together in a variety of ways, whether it's for retirement, to negotiate the rent, or to negotiate wages, because fundamentally, individually, you cannot survive in this environment. The odds are too much against you unless you possess a lot of capital or you possess significant skills and abilities to contact the right people for that level of skills and experience.
Let me interject and just add that I agree with you, Ed, that the risk is great, but I'm not a believer that you do not engage thoughtfully in this discussion and debate and figure out how to minimize risk. Right now, the risk is not being shared in the way that it needs to be shared. Right now, the risk attends mostly to those on the lowest income rung. And what we're seeing is that we continue to feed this growing cycle of poverty. The numbers are growing. They're increasing for people who are struggling. And so if we don't figure out how to level the risk, stop the risk and level it, and then figure out how to spread it and share it, we're going to continue to see an exacerbation of the problem.
Anyone? No?
I was just going to say the risk is greatest for the young, actually, right now, no matter what color.
You want to respond? No? Okay, so let's take 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll let the panelists respond to them in groups. Okay?
I don't have a question. I have a comment, and that comment
As long as it's brief.
minimum wage should have been increased to $15 or more in the 1980s. Okay, in between 1987 and 2003, here in Manhattan, I worked a semester, and most of the companies I work for are still operating. They may have merged with other companies, they may have changed their names, but they're still operating. So therefore, there's no hardship for them. Okay, tax the rich, not the poor. Okay, I'm getting fed up with these employers saying we don't have the money to pay you a higher wage. You got the money, okay? It's in your nostrils, okay? You got the money in your nostrils. I don't want to hear it, okay? That money is going up your nostrils. If it's not going up your nostrils, where's it going? I'm tired of hearing that. I was tired of hearing that back in the 1980s and the 1990s, okay? Like I said, this should have been done back in the 1980s. Okay. Which is why we're here now. We're here now because this problem wasn't alleviated then. So we're just dragged it out. Now we're over 10 years behind. Okay. That's outrageous.
All right, next question.
I have one question. If big business would prefer to negotiate with labor as opposed to going to the city council the way you said, why do you spend millions of dollars fighting unions across the country?
I was speaking about New York.
Well, why do you spend millions of dollars in New York fighting labor?
I don't think that they do.
All right, one more, and then we're going to let the panelists respond.
Paul mentioned the $13 billion cost to taxpayers, also of Medicaid, and I'm wondering, like, I think it's great to hear individual stories, of course, but we're talking about mobilizing people out of poverty, and that's a huge cost. I've worked with domestic workers for many years. This is an issue among domestic workers and getting them to receive benefits and such. So who's really quantifying that? And I want to hear a little bit more about, like, the case, about the average cost to taxpayers, like here in New York State, nationally, of poverty, and like how that will help. Maybe minimum wage increases are not the solution. I'm not sure what it is, but just this mobilization out of poverty and that average cost, and Medicaid specifically, because it seems like, and I'm not sure, Catherine mentioned something about 80% of Medicaid going to the last 18 months of life, but I'm not sure of that. It seems like a lot of people are receiving those benefits.
It sounds like the audience is interested in some solutions to address the growing disparities that exist in our society. And they had very nuanced points and questions, so let's lead with Paul responding.
Just for studies on the cost to the New York taxpayers of low-wage employment, I think there was a piece put out by University of California I think earlier this summer that you could find online with that showing that 13 billion figure. There was another report that I think was Urban Institute did focused on the city level. Was it? I can't remember if your organization was part of it. Yeah, there's a study by Urban Institute looking at the cost to taxpayers for in New York City. From employees of earning less than $15 an hour. On the Medicaid savings generated by higher minimum wages, I think there's a process now as this proposal is evaluated of costing out and estimating what the cost impact and savings will be for Medicaid and the state's human services programs of transitioning to $15. On Medicaid, Kathy alluded to the long-term care component, home care and nursing homes. There's a significant cost in transitioning those programs up to $15. On the insurance side of the health insurance side of Medicaid, that's where the savings accrues, where low-wage workers who are on the current New York Medicaid, where the state picks up 50% of the tab, many of them get shifted to ACA expansion Medicaid or the ACA exchanges, where the state portion is just 10%. So that all of that, I think, was the budget. I'm sure the governor's budget folks and other groups are in the process of modeling. If you wanted to look at one example, there's a University of California study modeling it for a $13 minimum wage proposal in California. They compared a $10 and a $13 proposal, and they break down the components, both the costs and then the savings by various state programs. And you can find that on the University of California Berkeley Labor Center's website. And the other place that's done a lot of modeling is the Center for American Progress, showing similar analysis.
All right, let's do one more round. There's a question here, here and here, and that's it. And we'll hear them all.
Hi, my name is Allison Cook, and I work at PHI. I would just like to add something to the conversation. In New York City and the surrounding area, there was a law called the Wage Parity Law that increased home health aid wages. So we conducted a study that looked at how that increase in wages impacted their benefits. While wage parity didn't decrease their overall, I guess, compensation at the end of the day, including public benefits, a higher increase might actually do that. I would encourage everyone to look at our study. But
we got to go quick, sorry.
Sorry. So I would just like to add to the conversation, in addition to increasing wage, what reforms would you like to see to public benefits?
Okay. Any other ones?
Hi, I just wanted to say can you hear me? Is it on? Oh, okay. I just wanted to support Catherine's comment regarding how employers, respond with people that have their degrees or that have experience. I've been in job development, workforce development for almost 26 years now, and my main goal is I deal with employers, and get their idea on what they want in their candidates. And one of the constant communication that comes up consistently is that, yes, the degree, but the experience is what they want more. And sometimes we have to whittle them down from 3 years to 6 months. But without that experience, the employers are really, wanting that, and they will bypass someone with a master's degree straight out of college, even if it's, an internship, but just some type of experience. The employers right now, as of, I would say, 3 years, as of 2015, they're more stickler on that. That's the deal breaker right now, even if you come out fresh with a master's degree.
One more question.
Do you want responses or?
Oh.
Yeah, one more question, then we're going to get responses.
I just wanted to add one fact to the conversation, which is how the ratio of the lower pay earners to the CEO has changed. If you look at how much money a CEO made in the 1970s and you compare that to how much the wage of the guy at the bottom of the chain in the company has changed, what it was in the 70s and how it is now, I think it has changed by a number of 3 or 4. So when we think about those issues in the context of income inequality, productivity, and so on and so forth, I mean, it sounds weird to suggest that CEO are so much better now compared to the people at the bottom of the chain, compared to what they were in the 70s. I mean, I don't think I buy that. And that in and of itself, I think, could go towards raising the minimum wage.
Okay. Responses from the panel.
So I'll just begin by saying, and I'll try to be very brief, speaking to skills and experience and how that relates to income and earnings. We know that for years, we go back decades, that we've had limited access on the part of people of color to certain industries and certain jobs, right? And what it all comes down to is networks exposure. We all can go to school and get a certain degree, but if you don't go to a certain school and meet with a certain someone or connect to a certain someone of color, you're less likely to be in the mix and to then be able to be in play for certain jobs and positions, right? And we can talk for hours about that whole other piece, and we don't have time. So it's not just simply put them, this is, I think, what you were speaking to, Kathy, about SEO, how that gives young people of color access to people who are in certain fields to give them that opportunity. But everybody doesn't have that. On the issue of other income supports and benefits. So we should not sit here and think that increasing the minimum wage is the answer to all of our problems. It is a step forward, but for people who are struggling to make ends meet, we still have the issue of the economic benefits cliff, and the fact that if you earn a little more, maybe you will have a reduction in your child care, a reduction in your SNAP benefits, you may lose your housing supports. So as we look at the increasing the minimum wage, we also have to make sure that it's not at the expense of people losing other income supports. And I invite you to look at FPWA's anti-poverty report, which shows you that if the government wanted to really reduce poverty, dare I say, eradicate poverty. Sound investment over time in everything from an increase in minimum wage, child care subsidies for all who qualify, housing subsidies, EITC, for families as well as for adults without families, a senior and tax disability credit, transitional jobs. These things can make the difference.
I guess I would say that to wrap up, and because it's been raised several times, I guess no matter how worked up you want to get about the issue of CEO compensation and the big banks and risk and failure and non-failure, that the really relevant issue here has to do with a different set of people. It has to do with the Korean immigrant grocer in Queens. It has to do with the owner of the truck repair shop in Schoharie and the pizzeria owner in Utica and the guy with the tool and die shop in Elmira, and a lot of people like that who are the employers who would be be facing a 67% increase in their minimum wage. And that's, a lot of them will not actually eat that. They will either not still be in business, or they will find a way to do without some of the workers they've been hiring. That's I think, simply a fact that you need to be cognizant of. Secondly, it's been raised many times here, the issue of how experience is so vitally important, I'm sorry to lay it in the audience. I mean, we all know this. The first job is the key thing. No matter what that first job is, you have to have that first job. And I'm just going to suggest to you that you consider the likelihood, or at least in your own mind, the possibility that many thousands of people will not get that first job if you raise the minimum wage too high. In fact, it's been conceded that there is such a thing as too high, so perhaps the disagreement here is how high too high is. But I think that's the main problem. And so the phrase I would leave you with, to sum up what I would request that people in this audience consider, is unintended consequences. If you are a student of social sciences and of public policy, you have to be acquainted with the iron law of unintended consequences. That is, they always happen. And the bigger the change you make and the more radical it is, the more severe the unintended consequences could be. And I think in some cases predictable. So that's what I would leave with.
So the way that we think about this is we need good jobs and strong communities. We need a set of policies that help create jobs and distribute income at the point of production and servicing, and sustain our communities by creating a net of policies that help sustain working families. Median household income, adjusted for inflation in this country since my son was born, has declined 7.2%. Workers in this economy are hurting. The ability of working people to be able to face an employer and bargain a good deal, whether they have in their possession a PhD, years of work experience, or they are blue-collar workers who just came for this country, has been eroded. We think that the way to go forward is to be able to not only increase the minimum wage, but to be able to restore the reality of affordable housing, affordable education, respect for workers' rights, and have a new contract in our economy at large that recognizes that the gains at the top continue to go just mathematically in the way that they're going. Too greater share of our national income will be in the possession of too few people. So with corporate income having declined for workers, the share of workers in the national income has declined the way that it has, we think that the real risk is not to do nothing, that the real risk is to remain with the policy that we have in place, because they're going to erode the very fabric of our democracy and are going to make the demands on what the solution is even greater in the future, not just on working people, but on those who are benefiting from the current economy. So I think we still have time to take a different path. I think we still have time to share the risk in a way that elevates the average working person in this country. And I believe that not doing so is going to present even greater problems in the future.
I would just quickly say that I think that the last decade has been a period during which there's been more and more understanding in the business community and among employers about the threat of the loss of economic opportunity, the loss of upward mobility, the loss of a secure retirement, a secure job and secure retirement. that's very much front of mind in the business community as well. And while the routes to getting there are more through investment in education, infrastructure, as opposed to government mandates, it's recognized that you have to have a balance. So I'm hopeful with, hopefully when we get a new president and we have an opportunity for a next generation of activity, that these conversations will become productive rather than the stalemate we have in Washington right now.
Thanks. I think Kathy's exactly right. There's much more business community leadership and sort of support and recognition for the need to do things to combat economic inequality and even an openness to raising the minimum wage, among other things. You know, the obstacles to raising the minimum wage have really always been political, not economic. And you know, New York is has been really underperforming, partly because of divided government and you know, partisan polarization. New York is a very expensive, relatively high wage state, and it's had very lagging minimum wages because of the politics in Albany. So we're really now at a historic moment where New York is poised to lead the nation with a very, very significant increase that'll have very beneficial effects statewide. And it's really a historically important moment that's really been. We've been led to this point by the striking fast food workers, joined by other workers, home health care workers, child care workers, low wage workers across the nation, but really launching right here in New York, that have created this this political moment and focused national attention on the need to on income inequality and the corrosive effect it's having on our democracy and our economy. So it's a really important historical moment for New York right now.
So I'm going to close by taking off my moderator hat and suggest a dramatic policy, which is a federal job guarantee, which has got at least some support from both the left and not as much from the right, but some from the right. In a recent Rolling Stones poll, there was when the question was phrased a certain way, about half Americans supported that the government provide jobs for those that wanted and needed a job. It would reduce the need for a minimum wage by putting a lower bound on sanctioning private sector, that they have to at least pay a certain amount of wage in order to attract workers. It would reduce the need for other benefit programs like health care reform. It would improve worker conditions. It would address the psychological costs from being unemployed. It would reduce discrimination of stigmatized populations. It would dramatically improve our physical and human capital infrastructure, as well as provide aggregate demand stimulus. It would reduce the incentive for to address malice behavior if the finance industry does something where we have to bail them out, because we'd have already in place a base so that what's the term? Main Street won't fall below a certain level. It would reduce the need for several federal subsistence programs that are already in existence. It would reduce the strain on state and local budgets. And then finally, perhaps its biggest point, and this is consistent with what Hector has been describing all day, it would dramatically raise the worker bargaining power and reduce the threat of unemployment so that workers themselves can negotiate with the private sector without the risk of destitution if they're unemployed. Okay, so I'm going to end on that, but thank the panelists. I got the last word, sorry. I'm going to end on that and thank them for a lively, cordial conversation. Thank you.
Very nice meeting.